Hello, everyone. We are ASPG, Allegheny Science Policy Group here at the University of Pittsburgh. Today, we will be interviewing State Senator Jay Costa. He's the minority party leader for the Democrats in the State General Assembly Senate here in Pennsylvania. We're going to be going through multiple questions going from budget, energy, public health, his role in both the Senate as well as in other programs across the state. So it should be a very good interview. I'm Anthony Bergoli, the president of ASPG. I'll be one of the interviewers, and then
I'm Lacey Zakevich. I am also with ASPG and I will be assisting with the interview as well.
And then, hi, I'm Brendan Chapko. I'm sitting in representing the Penn Science Policy Diplomacy Group, just observing the interview.
it should be a very good interview today, and a lot of things are talked about. So we'll give some context and description about some programs that we talk about, but we look forward to it. Hello, everyone. Today we have the pleasure of interviewing State Senator Jay Costa. If you'd like to give us a bit of an introduction with yourself, that'd be great.
Well, thank you very much. I'm State Senator Jay Costa. I represent the 43rd District in the Pennsylvania State Senate. I serve as the Democratic leader of the Senate Democrats in Harrisburg. My 21 other colleagues have elected me that position now for more than 12 years. And I serve as essentially the floor leader and policy leader with respect to that. I represent half the city of Pittsburgh, as well as the suburban communities around Allegheny County in the eastern section of the county. And in the city of Pittsburgh, a large part of the district I represent is the Oakland section, for example, where the University of Pittsburgh, Carlow University, and CMU are all housed.
Perfect. Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
I'll just give a brief introduction. I'm Anthony, president of Allegheny Science Policy Group here at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm studying immunology. If Lacey, you'd like to.
My name is Lacey Zakevich, and I am also a PhD student at the University of Pittsburgh. I work in ecology and evolution.
Brendan, if you want to give yourself an introduction, he's one of our collaborators from UPenn.
Sure. Nice to meet you. I'm just a fly on the wall in this interview. I'm an undergrad at UPenn studying finance, international relations, and environmental science.
Excellent.
All right, so I think without further ado, we can hop into the first set of questions. So first off, something very important here in the state of Pennsylvania is energy. Pennsylvania is the second largest producer of natural gas and third largest producer of coal in the United States by state based on the Energy Information Administration. However, we're only 45th when it comes to things like solar, renewable energies like wind and hydropower. How, if all, will you transition to alternative energies in the state of Pennsylvania while also balancing our fossil fuel industries?
So as the Senate Democratic Caucus and myself in particular have worked to enhance the utilization of renewables, solar, windmills, and the like, and other forms of clean energy to be able to provide for what we need for. We've been met with resistance with our Republican colleagues, quite frankly, over the course of years. I've worked with regard to worked currently with the governor in terms of developing the announced lightning plan that he put into place. That I think is a plan that's going to be able to be supported by labor and the environmental community, when I think is important, in the energy sector as well. I think that's one of the telling points of what I deem to be a plan that's going to be helpful in moving forward to balance the interests of each of those groups. We have an obligation to provide to meet the demand of energy consumption, and production is going to be an important part of that conversation. We need to ensure that we create the demand, address the demand, but also recognize that we need to lower costs and also at the same time help create jobs by utilizing the energy that we have, the resources that we have to develop this energy. The move towards more greener activities is something we're working on. We've put together the PRESS and PACER programs that are part of the Lightning Plan that we've worked on for a couple of years now. And the goal is to be able to impact the portfolios so that we have a better opportunity to increase our utilization along those lines. Looking, as I mentioned, at solar and wind and hydropower as part of the raising up those tiers along those lines. So we have more work to do in that space. But PRESS is one of them way we're dealing with. The second part of it is our PACER, which essentially would be our Pennsylvania RGGI. As we know, RGGI right now is stuck in litigation, and hopefully the court will make a decision soon so that we can move on from it. There are many folks who believe that just having RGGI lingering and hanging over our heads that has stymied development with respect to folks who want to come here and to create some energy generation. So we have to work through that. Many believe we're missing out on an opportunity to be able to create energy, electricity, and the like, to be able to be a player in the national scene. The PACER essentially would be our cap and invest program, so folks can determine our own cap and then how we invest in those resources and revenue that comes from that, how we can do that in the form of rebates back to the electric bills, for example, to consumers, but how we can also make other investments along the lines of, helping to facilitate even more technology advancements that need to take place, particularly in the renewable space. So these are some of the things that we're going to continue to look at. But, we fought hard to keep the RGGI program from the Republicans from removing us from that. We'll continue to be able to do that until the decision is made. But in the meantime, we believe that we need to be investing and looking at the governor's lightning plan to be able to help achieve the goals that we talked about.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for the very in-depth explanation. It's good to hear that there's a lot of collaboration, at least from your side, with the governor's side, and trying to get this infrastructure built, and also sending the money back to the consumers, or to the citizenry, as you kind of mentioned, give some compensation in their energy bills. So that's awesome.
All right, so I have a couple of questions now to ask you in the public health sector.
Sure.
So currently, the right to abortion is not codified in the PA Constitution. We expect this, as well as other issues such as changing requirements for abortion clinics and who is able to provide abortion care beyond physicians, to be on the legislature in the coming years. What policies, if any, will you and your offices be taking to address abortion access in Pennsylvania?
Well, let me be clear. Abortions remain safe and legal in Pennsylvania as we speak today. And I can tell you that over the past several years, we have withstood many challenges from our Republican colleagues to remove that right in Pennsylvania and make it more difficult to do things with respect to providing for and addressing the reproductive rights of women in our Commonwealth. A number of years ago, we fought back. Unfortunately, we lost in the end when there were changes to how the facilities would need to look like and who would need to be able to provide those services, elevating them essentially to hospital settings, which resulted in a number of facilities closing that provided less opportunity for folks to be able to access and address their reproductive rights. We will continue to work to fight any measures that Republicans put forward to be able to try to again, take this right away. We have worked to be able to also introduce legislation that would enshrine what you talked about, the right to an abortion in Pennsylvania statute and also in the Constitution, but also other things dealing with right to privacy and preserve other rights as well as women's body autonomy and access to health care more broadly. Things like prohibiting states from sending money, for example, to services that are provided in different places around the Commonwealth. So we're going to continue to fight for a woman's right to choose and educate the public about the dangers of limiting access to abortion on women's health. But we've tried to enshrine it in the state statute and in the Constitution, and our measures as the minority party in the Senate have not been able to go anywhere, and that's frustrating. So our work has been over the last half dozen or so years, has been in a defensive mode, trying to prevent the enactment of constitutional amendments and or statutes that would prohibit it, but also make it more difficult for folks to be able to make that choice that they want to make along those lines. So we'll continue to be in that space, but also looking to aggressively support anything that comes over from the House that would be looking to enshrine this right into our Constitution.
Thank you. So our next question is also related to public health and looking towards Governor Shapiro's 2025-2026 budget proposal. There's an inclusion of over $90 million allocated towards gun violence prevention. How exactly will these funds be used, and what programs will be implemented or expanded to reduce firearm deaths across the Commonwealth?
So there's a number of ways I think we need to address gun violence in our communities. And to me, it goes beyond just our community gun violence, but it goes across addressing, when people think of gun violence, they think of the community, the neighborhood shooting or the downtown shooting that took place. Access to weapons is far more serious than that. And I do think that we need to take a variety of steps to address that. To answer your question more specifically about the governor's budget proposal, the gun violence program is something Senate Democrats have been advocating for and been successful in getting into the budget a number of years ago. We were the ones that started this program a number of years ago through the Attorney General's office, and it has expanded over the course of time. Those resources are sent into the community to be able to work with organizations that work to prevent gun violence and take other steps in terms of community-based prevention programming. That's exactly where those resources will go and will continue to go. It's unfortunate that we have to keep adding to that. But I do believe that we have to take a common sense approach to our gun violence programming and legislative policies. There are a number of measures that we can take, that we should take, that we haven't taken yet, that are very public thinks we need to do that and supports what we're talking about. Extreme risk protection orders, for example, are something that we should be doing. There should be no question about it. The red flag laws, as they're known, legislation that says if individuals in a position of crisis at the moment and have access to weapons, that those weapons could possibly be removed through a court proceeding for a limited period of time until that crisis is resolved. That's going to be important. We already do that somewhat with respect to the domestic violence PFA situations. We should expand it along those lines. Again, we can't get our colleagues to address those measures. But to me, that's one of the things that we can do. I think we also need to talk about things like, lost and stolen weapons. When people lose their weapons, we need to find out as soon as possible and track them as best we can. Universal background, both universal background checks and also, as I mentioned, the red flag laws, strong support from the public in terms of things that we should be doing. We should have longer waiting periods with respect to when people buy guns. These are all things that we need to do, along those lines. But we have to continue to making these investments that you're talking about. The more resources we put into our communities to expand these opportunities, I think, are going to be important. Those are some of the things that I think we need to look at. But we also just need to restrict access to weapons to a variety of folks in a variety of different ways. I grew up in Squirrel Hill, Pittsburgh, where Tree of Life, the worst anti-Semitic attack in United States history upon the Jewish community. And it was awful. We need to take steps to be able to address those type of things. That relates to a series of hate crime bills that I've been working on, both with Representative Dan Franco and I, as well as Representative Napoleon Nelson. We have been working to be able to put into place statutes that address these type of things. So, for example, looking to see whether or not collecting a database of hate crime individuals, I should say, who are part of hate groups across the Commonwealth. Right now, the research or knowledge of them is so dispersed across Pennsylvania. We need to have what I call a centralized opportunity to have folks, be a part of that discussion. So local agencies have access to information that may be taking place 200 some miles away. So a database along those lines. We also need to make sure that we collect appropriate data. You all are university students, whether it be in Southeast PA or Southwest. We need to do a better job of collecting data with respect to hate crimes, not necessarily crimes that result in gun violence or anything, but monitoring hate crimes. The amount of hate crime that's taking place in our communities has risen, particularly in an anti-Semitic way. And I think we need to be able to capture, the universities and colleges need to capture that data and then be able to compile it so we know what things are looking at. So when families want to look to come to university, for example, from maybe some other country or from another part of or maybe a different background, they should be able to know what's taking place with respect to that space and what hate crimes are taking place there. These are some of the things that I think we should be doing. The other piece that worries me a lot is that we've failed to recognize that some of the highest number of suicides are with our veterans, and they utilize weapons along those lines. We need to do a better job of understanding that and appreciating that and taking steps to be able to limit access. Again, when folks are in crisis or appear to be in crisis, what steps we can take to avoid those type of outcomes. But there are a variety of things that we can be doing, but engage in the community, both prevention wise, but also informing folks about what can be done is really important. And that's what those resources will continue to go to.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing those community initiatives as well as your work on those hate crime bills that you're pushing forward. At this point, I will pass it back to Anthony for a few more questions.
Yeah, and I actually think that previous question leads great into this next question about the budget as well. So obviously the governor's budget proposal is very large. It's about $51.5 billion spending plan that's going to allocate billions to public schools, hundreds of millions to the transit system, tens of millions to different other programs and projects. Of course, with such a large proposal, there's many things that the opposition might challenge with this. Do you foresee any issues about pushing forward this proposal or this budget plan? And are there any aspects that you foresee seeing significant pushback or being altered at all?
So I think we start with the governor's budget proposal each year as the starting point for negotiations. And while we hope that we are able to incorporate everything he proposes into a final document, final budget, excuse me, negotiations will take place over the course of time. What I can tell you is that right now, as I sit here at the end of February, beginning, we're in the first week of appropriation hearings, there seems to be a disagreement with respect to the amount of revenue coming into the Commonwealth and the fact that we might be using a significant portion of remaining surplus as well as tapping into our rainy day fund. So that's the parameters. The governor wants to spend X, and Republicans think we don't have X, we only have Y. And that's going to be the dialogue that's going to take place over the course of the next several months. My hope is that it culminates in a budget by June 30th. But as one of my Republican colleague leaders indicated over the weekend, that it's not likely that that's going to be the case, but we're going to continue to pursue along those lines. I think what's important is that we have open dialogue. And I think as leader of our Democratic caucus, I feel as if our ability to work with our Republican colleagues on budgetary matters and other matters as well is probably better than a lot of other places around the country. And I think that long working relationships that have lasted a lot of years and working together have demonstrated that, particularly the last two budgets. I think we played a major role in resolving the outstanding differences. I can tell you that that's what I was able to do. And we're going to continue to be a part of that conversation. The areas of the budget I do think that are going to be potentially problematic going forward in terms of what the governor proposed is probably the largest piece is going to be the piece I think we need to do, and I think you'll see support for, will be our continuing effort to address our funding for our K-12, for our public education, for our students. We, as you probably know, Pennsylvania had a challenge to its education funding formula. It was deemed to be unconstitutional by Commonwealth Court. No appeal to the Supreme Court, so it's final law. From that, we developed a Basic Education Funding Commission that came out with recommendations that said we need $6 billion to adequately fund our schools and address tax inequities. And that's what we set out to do. So those recommendations came back. Last budget, we put into place the first year of a 6-year plan to be able to, 7-year plan to get to the $6 billion. And we put into the budget an increase of about $565 million in education spending for our K-12 school districts around the Commonwealth. Not every school district received it because it was a question of adequacy and also tax inequity. So in order to address adequacy and to support tax equity, about 325 school districts or so received that bucket of money. We provided other money to all the school districts, all 500 in a separate column. But at the end of the day, that's going to be something I think we'll see us continue to try to do. That'll be a major point for Democrats in this discussion. And I do think Republicans will acquiesce to some degree in that. I think some of the challenges are coming in some of the numbers that the governor has proposed with respect to revenue would be generated For example, the governor's proposed a significantly high number for recreational marijuana this upcoming year and the out years. Republicans don't believe that would be the case. Similarly, with respect to something called skill games, so they're questioning his revenue projections and also the amount of growth in terms of the revenue growth that we're going to see. There's a difference there, as I said at the outset. So that's going to be the big challenge. The energy space that we just talked about, I think you're going to continue to see that to be part of the conversation. There's going to needs to be done in that space as well. We have an issue in this Commonwealth, or an opportunity, I should say, with respect to electric generation. And it's derived from our data centers and coming online. It's about AI. It's about these, currency, cryptocurrency, and other things. Those things have been impacting our ability to have sufficient energy for us to be able to deploy. And we got to take steps to be able to grow it, and also at the same time make certain that we're recognizing consumers' needs and what consumers are going to need with respect to being able to afford, quite frankly, their electric bills. So that's where the rub is right now. What are we going to do in that space? As I talked earlier, we have the governor's lightning plan that's out there. We want to try to be able to put into place, but that's going to be a point of contention as we go forward. The major points of contention, I would say, would be along those lines.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Definitely very in depth with that. And I think that actually, again, leads us to our next question very well, which is about the Performance-Based Funding Council, which you are a member of. I think if you would be able to just give a brief description of what that is for our audience, then also, as a member of this council, what criteria do you use to dictate how you allocate funds to different universities in the state?
So the Performance-Based Funding Commission is derived from a revamping of our State Board of Education, which used to have a Higher Education Commission. Now we created a new board. It's called the Board of Higher Education, which I serve on, as well as a number of my colleagues, 4 or 5 colleagues as well, 3 other colleagues, I should say. And our role is to be able to look at the higher education system across the Commonwealth and be able to make recommendations to the General Assembly about ways in which things can be done along those lines to better facilitate and coordinate higher education at different levels, most importantly. But also part of that is this whole performance-based funding commission that is looking at the 3 state relateds, and only the 3 state relateds, Pitt, Penn State, and Temple. So we're looking at these universities and determining what is the best way what metrics should we utilize to be able to drive out resources along those lines. So the governor's proposed a flat funding for those 3 schools right now, which means they will be receiving what they received last year, but also preserved $60 million in his proposed budget, that the $60 million will be driven out based upon the metrics that this commission comes up with. And right now we're going through the process of determining what those metrics should be. And we've had 3 meetings now, 3 hearings across the state, at Penn State, at Temple, and at Pitt just last week. And now we are going to start to collaborate in greater detail, looking at, again, what metrics we would utilize and what percentages we apply to them, what weight we give each one, et cetera. And then that'll determine how we'll portion out that $60 million. We've looked at a number of states. Iowa, we've looked at just this week. Florida came in and made a presentation. Florida has a state system of higher education, which I think is about 10 universities up and down Florida's coastlines in Central Florida, and how they've had access to a performance-based funding system for a number of years, and it deemed to be very successful. So we're looking at, just for 3 schools, what are the criteria that we're going to be looking at, or at least I think we'll see at the end of the day, be part of this conversation. Things like, the number of students, for example, and it'll all be related to growth from year to year, by the way. And these 3 schools will be competing essentially against each other. But things along the lines of, first-time students enrolled in university, first-time families, enrolled. The number of years that it takes to graduate, your 4-year graduation rates, your 5-year graduation rates, your retention from year to year, the diversity, the nature of the diversity of your university, all those type of things. Florida, for example, looks closely at 6 months out, how many folks are employed, who the graduates are employed. Those are some of the metrics, just a couple of examples of some of the things we'll look at. Some schools want us to look at, for example, the enrollment as a major factor. That remains to be seen whether or not that becomes one. I think where we'll end up is that we'll probably have 5 or 6 or so metrics that we all agree upon. And then at some point, each school would be able to add maybe a seventh that they deem is most important to them. So, for example, the city, University of Pittsburgh, I suspect maybe something along the lines of research might be something that they would put a high cost or high, value to. So that conversations are taking place, but those are just a couple of examples of the metrics that you may see at the end of the day. Our charge is to have this completed by April 30th, which I think it's a tight timeline, but I think we'll successfully meet it. And the goal is to be able to have it implemented in this upcoming budget. That's why we put April 30th as the time to do that. The overall work of the larger board, it's going to be ongoing for a number of years looking forward in terms of how what steps we take going forward. So that's not the sense of urgency to be able to relate to how we fund our 3 state related, but that's some of the things we're looking at.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great to hear how, like, behind the scenes, exactly how our funding is getting in there and how it's being allocated and divvied up to different universities. I guess a follow-up to that, I'm sure you're aware of a lot of the changes at the federal level is having major effects on universities, particularly in the Commonwealth. Just last week, the University of Pittsburgh actually announced that its admissions for PhD students is being paused because of uncertainties with NIH funding. So I guess how will you leverage your position not only as a state senator, but also as a member of these higher education councils to bring stability back to Pennsylvania higher education?
That's a great question. I mean, we are advocating as a board member of the University of Pittsburgh, but also Duquesne and trustee at CCAC. Higher ed's a big part of what we do, and I do. And I can tell you resources from the federal government may play a major role in each of those spaces, particularly as we learn in Pittsburgh, what's taking place with our graduate students, pausing that. That's going to have major impact going forward. But in my role, I can be a voice to let folks know that this is wrong. This is very disruptive, and it has long-lasting impacts on not only universities, but on people's lives going forward and in our regions when you stop and think about it. The uncertainty and the chaos that is created is extremely problematic, and we're taking steps both through our caucus, meeting with folks and talking with folks in the community to do a better job of understanding so they have a better understanding what the impacts might be. Because I don't think folks necessarily are following or understand the impacts of, for example, what a pause on the graduate admissions would be, right? That's a big deal because we may be losing some of the best and brightest students who want to come here because they don't want to wait around to see what Pittsburgh's going to do. They want to continue their education. So we may be losing a lot of good quality folks along those lines. But again, it's the uncertainty that's been the problem. I'm communicating with my Congress people. I can tell you that on a regular basis to talk about it and coordinating with them and disseminating information that they provide to us to help folks better understand and provide pushback. So when folks better understand, folks can push back, not just legislators, but the folks in the community. I think you may have seen that yesterday in Squirrel Hill when there was a protest, folks at Forbes and Murray, which I think those are the type of things that are going to have to continue to happen. And it's just about disseminating information as best we can about what the impacts are going to be. But we talk to folks. I hear from folks every day, and both my personal life and my work life, and we're just trying to do what we can to be able to do what needs to be done.
Yeah, I'm definitely sure it's a very busy and chaotic period for our elected officials during this time. We have a few more questions. Just want to make sure that you're still good on time. Okay.
I'm good on time. What time is it?
I think it's 10:33
Yeah,
right
I'm
now.
good on time.
Okay, just let us know.
Yep.
I think I'll pass it back over to Lacey then, and she can continue.
Yes. So now our questions just want to shift a little bit to your role in the state Senate. And so we wanted to ask, as the leader of the minority party, how you navigate working on partisan legislation and maintaining party cohesion.
So it's a balance. We've got to balance when there's an opportunity for compromise and being willing to compromise. As I said at the outset, or earlier, I should say, I pride myself on my reputation as being someone who's willing to work with folks on the other side of the aisle, both in our own chamber, but also work with folks on the other side of the building which would be the House of Representatives, and also working closely with the governor's office. Garnering the support and respect of the governor's office is important, to be someone who's able to recognize that compromise needs to be done. As you look, and I've done that, and on the broader, bigger questions, on the budget issues, for example, that you'll see and come along in June as we go through our, not only will we go through our budget stuff, but we'll go through policy stuff as well. And being part of those conversations from our role was being able to best understand, like you said, our caucus cohesion and party cohesion, but not compromising that to be able to get to an end. So it's about having relationships and trusting one another and recognizing that there needs to be a compromise, and we're willing to accept that. And you're not going to get the full loaf of bread, quite frankly. But you got to be willing to know that there's a part of the piece of, the loaf of bread that you're going to be able to get could be significant. And that's getting buy-in on that part of it is important. And I think that's how things work out. But I personally worked on a number of items with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, where, I worked with Senator Devlin Robinson, a Republican from Allegheny County here, on the search and rescue, not only putting the legislation, creates a search and rescue unit here in the western part of the state, but also working collaboratively to find tens of or millions and millions of dollars to be able to support that over the last 3 years. I worked with Senator Stefano with respect to getting legislation done. Pat Stefano from down in Fayette and Somerset County, legislation that addresses driver's license for young folks, especially folks who have license suspensions because of they've been unable to pay the fines. Finding a way to be able to help them resolve that by doing community service and working with our courts folks to be able to do that. That's a piece of legislation. Certainly right now I'm working with my colleagues, Senator Bartolotta. We hope to be able to move forward legislation soon, dealing with something called electric shock notification. Electric shock drowning as an issue that has taken place along our rivers, and it's more prevalent than people think. But folks don't sometimes know that when they jump into the water on their boat or around their boat or at their dock, that there's a chance that that water could be electrified and it's caused deaths and have harmed individuals as well. And I learned that from a family here in Allegheny, Washington County in Allegheny, where they experienced that. Their son's best friend was killed in an electric shock drowning situation, and their son was injured as well. And it's all for lack of knowledge about that. So we're trying to increase knowledge and posting of signs and the like, comprehensive approach to it. But those are 3 examples I can think of working with my colleagues. Over the years, we've done a lot more than that. But it's about having working relationships and having a trust and faith and being willing to compromise. The driver's license legislation was a compromise. It wasn't exactly what all we wanted. It clearly wasn't what some of the folks in the House wanted. They wanted to go much further. But I couldn't get my Republican colleagues to go further than what we had been able to work out. And it's just be willing to accept that, I think, is the best way to do it. If you're going to be, it's my way or no way, then you're going to run into problems. You're not going to get anything done. And I think, in my view, we can build upon our successes. So as I look at this driver's license stuff, you can come back at some point with some experience, some data that says that, this is working, and we can also go the next step and we can modify it along those lines. Those are the ways I think we can address different things. But with regard to this budget, being part of the conversation and be willing to advocate without giving up our beliefs and go from there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was a really good description of making some progress to build upon in the future. And so this next question kind of goes along with these ideas of working across party lines. We've seen political polarization at an all-time high in America. And we wanted to ask how we see this polarization playing out at the state level. If we see these divisions occurring within the state Senate, or if we see a lot more of this type of cooperation you were describing and compromise.
So I think the polarization is there. I mean, you have folks on both extremes in the Senate. But I also think the majority of folks recognize, and I think both leaderships from the Republicans and Democrats in the Senate recognize that we have a job to do and that we have to get things done. And that we know at the end of the day, we have to work in the middle essentially, and go from there. I think that unfortunately the extremes positions are there, but they don't end up in final products, I would say, because they're extreme. And so I think that we recognize that we know we have an obligation to address policy, that particularly when we have issues that we're dealing with, whether it be, business tax climate, for example, we've been addressing collectively for the last several years, Democrats and Republicans. Energy stuff that we did that last year with respect to the carbon capture stuff. Some of the gun measures I talked to you about earlier go back maybe half dozen years, less than that maybe, with the domestic violence situations and PFAs and weapons. There are a variety of these things that we've done together as a body, because we've been able to put aside those stark differences and work on the things that people want us to talk about. Same thing with the education stuff, as I mentioned at the outset. That's Democrats, Republicans supporting that. There's another bunch of other spaces that we've worked together on that we addressed a policy concern or an issue that was prevalent in Pennsylvania that needed to be addressed. And we'll continue to do that. That's just how we operate. But I think there's no question that things are not pretty all the times, but I do think when it comes down to getting work done, we're able to do that.
All right, thank you. And I believe we have just one last question for you today.
Okay.
Yeah, so this kind of ties in with the previous questions as well. So obviously at the federal level, we saw major gains for the Republican Party. Obviously the presidential election, but also in Congress as well. And we have basically all three chambers of government at the federal level controlled by Republican or right-leaning individuals. How do you think this will affect how you operate, at least on the state level, and how this might affect you pushing progressive legislation through at Pennsylvania?
I think it's going to have a major impact on us in Pennsylvania. I think what's taking place with this Republican trifecta we have right now and what we see taking place with respect to DOGE and other policies that are coming through executive orders or through memorandums are going to have a significant impact on Pennsylvania. Let's first start with the fiscal side of things. It's going to have an impact along those lines with respect to the pausing of loans and grants of major projects that have been designed to take place here that are for example, I can think of two projects that are now questionable moving forward. Combined would probably do about 13 or 1,400 good family sustaining jobs related to Department of Defense and Department of Energy grants and loans that may not happen. That's scary. With respect to other policies, for example, the question as it relates to what's going to happen with the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid are major concerns to us. Not only from a financial standpoint as it relates to what we receive from the federal government regarding Medicaid reimbursements, but also with respect to, for example, the Medicaid expansion program. For example, right now, that portion of the program that's out of the Affordable Care Act, federal government pays 90% of the Medicaid, we pay 10%. Traditional Medicaid, which is a different group, it's about 55-45 or some number along those lines. 55 federal, 45 state. This administration looks now to want to take it down from 90% down to 55%. That would be a major impact to Pennsylvania revenue reimbursements, which would impact significantly our budget for this current fiscal year, if it's the last 3 months of our fiscal quarters, and the beginning of theirs, as they do their continuing resolution. But that's, for example, a fiscal standpoint to have a major impact. But on the quality of healthcare delivery, it's going to have an impact. What we're going to see happening at the end of the day is going into the next fiscal year for feds. They're looking to maybe put a cap on the amount of money we spend in Medicaid or do a block grant. That all has impact on the services that we would be able to provide to the residency. And particularly in Western PA and Allegheny and Pittsburgh, we do so much healthcare delivery, it would definitely have an impact there on the number of jobs and economic impact it has there. But those are just a couple of examples of the impact I see. It's on policy, it's on human service programming, It's going to be on financial issues with respect to grants and loans and things of that nature to help grow our economy. And those are the major impacts that I see it having. And it could have, as I mentioned, we're approaching March 1st. Come April 1st, I think the feds are supposed to do a continuing resolution of some sort. There's two different versions, one's in the Senate, one in the House, that will begin, I believe, April 1st. Well, April 1st, April, May, and June are our last quarter. Whatever comes out of that financially could have a significant impact on this current year budget. Right now we're facing about $150 million shortfall, or a shortfall of our projections from our tax revenue. That could expand that significantly, which has an impact on what we have available going into next year, which makes our challenge even greater. So this is the uncertainty is probably the most significant thing that's impacting us in terms of what's going to happen. We talked earlier about the University of Pittsburgh and the administrative fees related to NIH funding. That's a $100-some million hit to the University of Pittsburgh community, and it's going to have an impact across the board, both the number of employees and the nature of the research, scaling down or eliminating research, which has an impact on the economic impact in our community. So that's a concern. Those are just some of the ways in which I see what's happening at the federal government is going to impact folks. Not to leave out the fact that it demoralizes individuals and communities and workforces and all that impact. That's it's unfortunate. It's unnecessary the way to be done this way, and that's the trifecta that I worry about. Doesn't give that check and balance that we have right now. For example, in Harrisburg, we have a Democratic governor, Democratic House, Republican Senate. Fortunately, some of the things we've talked about in different spaces that you might see, for example, Republicans want to remove Pennsylvania out of the RGGI program, but for our House Republican Democrats and the governor, they can't do that with respect to putting abortion on the banning abortion on making a constitutional measure to ban abortions in Pennsylvania. They can't do that because they don't have the House of Representatives to pass that. So that's why a divided legislature, quite frankly, is important in my view, and also leads to compromise, because neither side can get anything done if you don't have what you need to be able to, if you're not able to compromise. And those things that are too difficult to get done get pushed aside, and the things we agree upon that move government forward and move policies forward are the ones that work best. So that's why a trifecta in government like that is very concerning to me. And I think already we see, and we're going to continue to see it play out once the resolution comes and they start passing legislation in the House and the Senate that's consistent with where the president wants them to be.
All right, thank you. Yeah, definitely a lot to chew on, and going to see major changes in the coming years. So, but I think that's everything we had for you today. So we really appreciate you coming and speaking on these issues. It was very informative to us, and I'm sure for our audience as well.
Well, I'm happy to do it. I appreciate the opportunity to do so. I hope you can digest from all that rambling some good nuggets there of information, and good luck on your future studies. And more importantly, thanks for the collaboration that you're doing with folks around the state. And if you need any follow-up or more further explanation on anything I said, please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to clarify.
All right.